The chapter daily routine. First illustration, the alarm clock goes off.
Suena el despertador.
Second illustration, to wake up.
Despertarse.
Third illustration, to get up.
Levantarse.
Fourth illustration, to turn on the light.
Encender, prender la luz.
Fifth illustration, to get dressed.
Vestirse.
Sixth illustration, to open a door.
Abrir una puerta.
Seventh illustration, to turn on a faucet.
Abrir un grifo.
Eighth illustration, to wash a face and hands.
Lavarse la cara y las manos.
Ninth illustration, to look in a mirror.
Mirarse en un espejo.
A quick overview. 10th illustration, to brush teeth. 11th illustration, to turn off a faucet. 12th illustration, to dry hands / a face with the towel. 13th illustration, to close a door. 14th illustration, to do exercises. 15th illustration, to take a shower. 16th illustration, to shave. 17th illustration, to shampoo hair. 18th illustration, to soap a body. 19th illustration, to dry hair. 20th illustration, to wipe feet on the rug. 21st illustration, to make the bed. 22nd illustration, to have breakfast. 23rd illustration, to put on shoes. 24th illustration, to lock a door. 25th illustration, to drop the kid off at school. 26th illustration, to go to work. 27th illustration, to work on the computer. 28th illustration, to sit at the school desk. 29th illustration, to play in the sandbox. 30th illustration, to have lunch. 31st illustration, to pick up the kids from school. 32nd illustration, to come home. 33rd illustration, to unlock a door. 34th illustration, to take off shoes. 35th illustration, to take off clothes. 36th illustration, to have dinner. 37th illustration, to sit in an armchair. 38th illustration, to do homework. 39th illustration, to play a game. 40th illustration, to watch TV. 41st illustration, to change the TV channel. 42nd illustration, to turn up the volume. 43rd illustration, to turn down the volume. 44th illustration, to iron a shirt. 45th illustration, to apply a face cream on a face. 46th illustration, to set an alarm. 47th illustration, to go to bed. 48th illustration, to dream a dream. The chapter vehicle. First illustration, to open a car door.
Abrir una puerta de coche.
Second illustration, to get in a car.
Meterse en un coche.
Third illustration, to insert the key into the ignition.
Insertar la llave en el interruptor de encendido.
Fourth illustration, to start the car.
Arrancar, encender un coche.
Fifth illustration, to warm up a car.
Calentar un coche.
Sixth illustration, to get behind the wheel.
Ponerse al volante.
Seventh illustration, to close a car door.
Cerrar una puerta de coche.
Eighth illustration, to fasten the seat belt.
Abrocharse el cinturón de seguridad.
Ninth illustration, to press the brake, clutch, gas pedal.
Presionar, pisar el pedal de freno, embrague, el acelerador.
A quick overview. 10th illustration, to move the shifter into first gear. 11th illustration, to release the clutch pedal. 12th illustration, to back up a car. 13th illustration, to drive someone to somewhere. 14th illustration, to tow a car. 15th illustration, to turn on headlights. 16th illustration, to turn on the high beam headlights. 17th illustration, to change gears. 18th illustration, to use turn signals. 19th illustration, to turn right. 20th illustration, to overtake a car. 21st illustration, to change lanes. 22nd illustration, to stop at the traffic lights. 23rd illustration, to take a detour. 24th illustration, to fill up the tank. 25th illustration, to make a U-turn. 26th illustration, to wait at the bus stop. 27th illustration, to get on the bus. 28th illustration to take a taxi. 29th illustration to have a car accident. 30th illustration to hit a dog. 31st illustration an overturned car. 32nd illustration to park a car. 33rd illustration to get stuck in traffic. 34th illustration to take for a spin. 35th illustration to put on the emergency brake. 36th illustration to open the window, the trunk, the hood. 37th illustration to close the trunk. 38th illustration to check the engine oil level. 39th illustration to change a tire, wheel. 40th illustration to have a flat tire. 41st illustration to inflate a tire. 42nd illustration to go to a gas station. 43rd illustration to jack up a car. 44th illustration to lower a car jack. 45th illustration to fix a car. 46th illustration to turn off the headlights. 47th illustration to turn on the AC. 48th illustration to jump start a car. 49th illustration to push a car. 50th illustration to fold, unfold side view mirrors. 51st illustration to lose control. 52nd illustration to turn on hazard lights. 53rd illustration to flash the headlights. 54th illustration to honk the horn. 55th illustration to unfasten the seat belt. 56th illustration to brake in a car. 57th illustration to get out of a car. 58th illustration to drive a car into a garage. 59th illustration to turn off the engine. 60th illustration to lock a car. The chapter cleaning and washing. First illustration to dust furniture.
Limpiar el mobiliario.
Second illustration to vacuum a floor.
Aspirar un piso.
Third illustration to clean windows.
Limpiar las ventanas.
Fourth illustration to shake out the rug.
Sacudir una alfombra.
Fifth illustration to beat a rug.
Limpiar una alfombra.
Sixth illustration to sweep a floor.
Barrer un piso.
Seventh illustration to rearrange furniture.
Cambiar los muebles.
Eighth illustration to wring out a duster.
Escurrir un trapo.
Ninth illustration to lay a carpet on a floor.
Colocar una alfombra en un piso.
A quick overview. 10th illustration to clean a carpet. 11th illustration to wash walls. 12th illustration to clean wallpaper. 13th illustration to take out the trash. 14th illustration to pour water out of a bucket. 15th illustration to take out a carpet. 16th illustration to roll up a carpet. 17th illustration to wash clothes by hand. 18th illustration to wash clothes in a washing machine. 19th illustration to rinse clothes. 20th illustration to put the powder in a washing machine. 21st illustration to shake laundry. 22nd illustration to hang clothes on a clothesline. 23rd illustration to dry dishes with a dish towel. 24th illustration to air a room. 25th illustration to draw curtains. 26th illustration to draw back curtains. 27th illustration to raise a blind. 28th illustration to pull curtains aside. 29th illustration to pull down a blind. 30th illustration to fluff up a pillow. 31st and 32nd illustrations to turn a pillowcase inside out. The chapter cooking. First illustration to pour water into a kettle.
Verter agua en un hervidor.
Second illustration to light a match.
Encender un fósforo.
Third illustration to put a kettle on a cooker.
Poner un hervidor en una estufa.
Fourth illustration to put the tea leaves into a teapot.
Poner las hojas de té en una tetera.
Fifth illustration to spread a tablecloth over a table.
Poner un mantén en una mesa.
Sixth illustration to slice bread.
Cortar un pan.
Seventh illustration to clear the table.
Limpiar la mesa.
Eighth illustration to cook food.
Cocinar los alimentos.
Ninth illustration to peel a potato.
Pelar una patata.
A quick overview. 10th illustration to slice an onion. 11th illustration to sift flour. 12th illustration to pour water into flour. 13th illustration to uncork a bottle. 14th illustration to sprinkle with salt. 15th illustration to dissolve yeast. 16th illustration to add yeast to flour. 17th illustration to add salt to flour. 18th illustration to knead dough. 19th illustration to let dough rise. 20th illustration to roll out dough. 21st illustration to cut dough. 22nd illustration to shred a cabbage. 23rd illustration to pour water into a saucepan. 24th illustration to fry meat. 25th illustration to stew beef. 26th illustration to boil corn. 27th illustration to salt fish. 28th illustration to put pepper. 29th illustration to seal up dough. 30th illustration to set the table. 31st illustration to sit at the dinner table. 32nd illustration to eat food. 33rd illustration to wash dishes. 34th illustration to seal a jar. 35th illustration to spread butter on bread. 36th illustration to reheat the food. 37th illustration to eat sunflower seeds. 38th illustration to make juice. 39th illustration to clean teeth with a toothpick. The chapter stove. First illustration to remove ash from a stove.
Limpiar la ceniza de una estufa.
Second illustration to put kindling.
Poner la leña menuda.
Third illustration to light a match.
Encender un fósforo.
A quick overview. Fourth illustration to light a wood stove. Fifth illustration to crumple up paper. Sixth illustration to add logs. Seventh illustration to place firewood. Eighth illustration to clean a chimney. Ninth illustration to poke fire. The chapter devices and communication. First illustration to add minutes to a cell phone.
Recargar el móvil.
Second illustration to pick up the receiver.
Coger el receptor.
Third illustration to hang up the receiver.
Colgar el receptor.
Fourth illustration to dial a number.
Marcar el número.
Fifth illustration a dropped call.
Una llamada interrumpida.
Sixth illustration the battery ran out.
El móvil se quedó sin batería.
Seventh illustration to turn on a cell phone.
Encender un teléfono celular.
Eighth illustration to turn off a cell phone.
Apagar un teléfono celular.
Ninth illustration to print a document.
Imprimir un documento.
A quick overview. 10th illustration to scan a book. 11th illustration to send a text message. 12th illustration to receive a text message. 13th illustration to drop a cell phone. 14th illustration to put ads. 15th illustration to plug a computer. 16th illustration to unplug the TV. 17th illustration to screw in a light bulb. 18th illustration to unscrew a light bulb from the socket. 19th illustration to charge a cell phone. 20th illustration to record a video. 21st illustration to take a picture. 22nd illustration to exchange currency. 23rd illustration to talk via Skype. 24th illustration to remove the SIM card. 25th illustration to insert the SIM card. 26th illustration to remove a battery from a cell phone. 27th illustration to insert a battery into a notebook. 28th illustration to insert a disk into drive. 29th illustration to eject a disk from drive. 30th illustration to read electricity, gas, water meter. 31st illustration to type on a keyboard. 32nd illustration to restart a cell phone. 33rd illustration a missed call. The chapter housekeeping. First illustration to thread a needle.
Enhebrar una aguja.
Second illustration to cut with scissors.
Cortar con tijeras.
Third illustration to spin wool.
Hilar lana.
Fourth illustration to knit socks.
Tejer calcetines.
Fifth illustration to comb wool.
Peinar lana.
Sixth illustration to hammer a nail.
Clavar un clavo.
7th illustration to chop wood.
Cortar leña.
8th illustration to cut logs.
Cortar troncos.
9th illustration to fell a tree.
Talar un árbol.
A quick overview. 10th illustration to split firewood. 11th illustration to plane wood. 12th illustration to sharpen the knife. 13th illustration to put a handle in an axe head. 14th illustration to remove a nail. 15th illustration to weld a metal. 16th illustration to plow a field. 17th illustration to dig a hole. 18th illustration to sweep a street. 19th illustration to mow grass. 20th illustration to unstitch the skirt. 21st illustration to milk a cow. 22nd illustration to water livestock. 23rd illustration to clean out a barn. 24th illustration to pasture graze cattle. 25th illustration to ride a horse. 26th illustration to harness a horse. 27th illustration to saddle a horse. 28th illustration to plant a vegetable garden. 29th illustration to water a vegetable garden. 30th illustration to remove weeds. 31st illustration to loosen the soil. 32nd illustration to darn socks. 33rd illustration to sew a dress. 34th illustration to pick vegetables and fruits. 35th illustration to drill metal. 36th illustration to punch holes with a hole puncher. 37th illustration to staple papers. 38th illustration to push a wheelbarrow. 39th illustration to carry sand in a wheelbarrow. 40th illustration to load sand into a wheelbarrow. 41st illustration to unload a wheelbarrow. 42nd illustration to clear snow. 43rd illustration to dig a pit. 44th illustration to fill in a pit. 45th illustration to put water into a bucket. 46th illustration to pour water out of a bucket. 47th illustration to carry buckets of water. 48th illustration to rake leaves. 49th illustration to ted hay. 50th illustration to mow the lawn. 51st illustration to bale hay in the round. The chapter clothes and footwear. First illustration to put on shoes.
Ponerse los zapatos.
Second illustration to put on a jacket.
Ponerse una chaqueta.
Third illustration to roll up sleeves.
Arremangarse.
Fourth illustration to take off clothes.
Quitarse la ropa.
Fifth illustration to polish shoes.
Abrillantar zapatos.
A quick overview. Sixth illustration to zip up a jacket. Seventh illustration to tie a tie. Eighth illustration to button a shirt. Ninth illustration to unbutton a shirt. 10th illustration to tie shoelaces. 11th illustration to untie shoelaces. 12th illustration to unzip a jacket. The chapter miscellanea. First illustration to go downstairs.
Bajar.
Second illustration to go upstairs.
Subir.
Third illustration to climb over a fence.
Trepar por una valla.
Fourth illustration to jump out of a window.
Saltar por una ventana.
Fifth illustration to climb a tree.
Trepar a un árbol.
Sixth illustration to climb down a tree.
Bajar de un árbol.
A quick overview. Seventh illustration to pack a suitcase. Eighth illustration to hang wallpaper. Ninth illustration to get a mortgage. 10th illustration to put on a watch. 11th illustration to take off a watch. 12th illustration to put an earring into an earlobe. 13th illustration to swaddle a baby. 14th illustration to make a doctor's appointment. 15th illustration to wait one's turn. 16th illustration to withdraw money from ATM. 17th illustration to get fired. 18th illustration to get a loan.